Oh, hello. In today's video, we're going to look at the new terrain that's coming in Kill Team Moroch. We're going to look at the rules associated with that terrain, and I'm going to have a little rant about terrain rules in Kill Team in general. Okay, let's go. So, the first new piece of terrain that we get in box is the Frontaris Landing pad, and this, if you've seen any unboxing videos, this is a big hunk of plastic. Okay, this is going to dominate your Kill Team board quite handily. So we define it thus: the top of the landing pad, so we're starting here, the top of the landing pad has the vantage point trait. All other parts of it have the heavy and low traits. So we've got a new trait, low. An operative climbing onto or dropping from the terrain feature treats its height as circle, even if the vertical distance it would need to travel is slightly more than circle. This means when dropping, the vertical distance travel is ignored. So this is Games Workshop's way of saying that when they designed this, they didn't kind of look at the measurements with a view to Kill Team, because it was originally 40k, and they're just trying to make it compatible with Kill Team by fudging the fact that it's probably slightly taller than 2 inches, right? And they just want to fudge that slightly to make it more playable. Right, we've got a rule here about the fuel tanks. The Frontaris Landing pad has fuel tanks, some missions. So this is referring to the Spec Ops narrative missions. So in those missions, they do a thing, blah, blah, blah. Most people watching this video aren't going to care. And certainly we, reviewing this without looking at the Spec Ops missions, it's kind of pointless. But I will note this designer's note here is valid, I believe, in sort of more match play scenarios, which is just to say that the Frontaris landing pad's fuel tanks are not a vantage point. Therefore, operatives can climb them but cannot finish a move or be set up on them. Because I'm guessing that technically it will be possible to balance your miniature on here. So it's a good job that there's some rules to tell us that we can't precariously place our models on there. Okay. Frontaris landing pad door. Some missions require blah 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 blah. Don't care. Okay. Not to be dismissive of narrative play, just that we don't have the narrative missions, we're not reviewing those, so this doesn't help us. Steps. The steps are a separate terrain feature that is sometimes attached to the Frontaris landing pad, which means that when you're building it, you probably want to leave them separate so you can decide whether you're attaching them or not attaching them. The handrails of the Frontaris landing pad steps have the insignificant trait. All of the parts of it have the light and steps traits. Great, we've got a new thing. So steps. Each time an operative climbs this terrain feature with this trait, it ignores the vertical distance that it travels. So basically, you just go upstairs, you move the flat distance, you don't have to worry. Your Space Marine can walk upstairs at the same speed at which he can walk along the floor. Fine, makes sense, is intuitive, and that's all groovy. So there's nothing really there. There's a little fudge about the steps and a little fudge about the height being slightly higher than one circle just to make it playable. Otherwise, it's a big slab of heavy terrain with a vantage point on top. Hab bunker. So this is a big old slab, right? STC Hab bunker terrain feature has the vantage point trait. All of the parts have the heavy trait. In the Shadow Operations mission pack, the STC's Hab bunker's rampart is indicated with a thick blue line. This is just because if you haven't ever played Shadow Ops, in the Shadow Ops missions, they give you the map. So it's to tell you what orientation to place the bunker. But for match play purposes, it's heavy. It's got the next big block of heavy cover, but only on one facing. And all along the top is a vantage point. And the doors, again, that's a narrative rule for the doors. I'm going to have a rant about doors in a little minute, just to spoil that, but I'm not talking about this door. This door should not be used to go into and out of the building unless you want to leave the top off the bunker, and then you have to have a whole separate conversation about shooting into and out of the little windows. I think it's far better for everybody concerned if this door remains a sealed door. I do want to talk about doors in a bit. But this door is not the one that I'm talking about. All will become clear later on. I think this is a very simple piece of terrain. This by the way, this will fit if you are building the terrain not for Kill Team. This fits the Minotaur, the pipes, right? And you can have pipes leading off into the distance. I always get this obsession with terrain kits. It's really sad. In that they're designed in a really cool Lego kit kind of way, and they can be kit bashed really satisfyingly. And those that remember some of the early battle reports on the channel know that I've got very satisfyingly kit bashed Sector Mechanicus terrain, but because of the direction that Kill Team's going in, it very much just wants you to build the terrain, you know, as the standard pieces as defined in the box, and play with those standard kind of map packs. And building big, unwieldy, joined up sections of terrain isn't really useful to anybody. But the terrain designer, if you ever find him on Twitter, there's all sorts of mad stuff that you can do combining all different Games Workshop terrains if what you're trying to do is make a cool looking board rather than to try and replicate a certain out-of-box experience. The Auspex Shrine and the Vox Antenna. So we'll start over here with the Vox Antenna. So the Vox Antenna has the Vantage Point and Confined traits. So it's a Vantage Point. Confined is new. While an operative is on this terrain featured Vantage Point, no other operatives can finish a move or be set up on the Vantage Point. So when you're up there, no one's coming up to charge you. Okay, so that's good. I think this should be a punishing Vantage Point, probably, because of how tall it is compared to the other things. But I'll get onto that rant in a minute. But it's not a punishing Vantage Point. I noticed in Can You Roll a Crits review, he called it a punishing Vantage Point. It doesn't have that rule. Maybe it should. The ladder is scalable. We know what scalable does. That's been added in into the FAQ now. Okay. But they've given us the designer's note for scalable to explain that as well. So it's this, right? So it's all explained there. You don't need to reference anything else. And then a narrative play mission about the control area, which we don't care about as much. And the Auspex Shrine, terrain. The base is insignificant. So this lime green section here does nothing. The pipe is light and traversable, so there's a little bit of light. The only bit of light terrain in this set is that little pipe, that's light, and the rest is just a lump of heavy terrain, and then some stuff about the control area that again we don't care unless we're playing the Spec Ops missions. And finally, and most interestingly, the Frontaris Stockade. It took me a while to track down all the action. So this blurry photograph here just says that there are these little wibbles, that connectors to let kind of slot. I believe that the terrain is designed so you can slot it in and out, right? And there's these curvy sections, and it's just saying that these little connectors count as stockades for all purposes. So these rules here also apply to these little bibbles. Now let's look at these. These rules are quite fun. So stockade, we're here. An operative climbing over the terrain feature needs to travel 2 circle. So circle up, circle down. So it's basically like a traverse, but a traverse that costs 2, if you kind of think about it that way. Yeah. When determining line of sight, if the active operative or the intended target is higher than the highest point of the terrain feature, it's not treated as obscuring. So the measurements determine though from the operative's bases. So if you're shooting from a vantage point or at someone on a vantage point or just on a slope, if you've got slopes and things on your table, then they're not obscured by this piece of terrain. Defendable. Each time an operative fights in combat, if it's not the active operative but is defending this terrain feature, it's always the attacker, regardless of any rules the enemy operative have. So if you're behind this and somebody charges you, you get to attack them first. For an operative to be defending the terrain feature, all the following must be true. It has an engage order. The active operative performed a charge action, and the active operative's controlling player cannot draw any cover lines to the target operative without them crossing the terrain feature. And they've got some examples here in the middle. So in this example, the traitor trooper has charged. No, the Phobos Marine has charged the traitor trooper, but the traitor trooper is going to get to strike first in that combat. But in this version, the Marine's going to get to strike first because you can draw lines across to where the traitor trooper is. And that's pretty cool. There's a gate here. It doesn't have any rules. We're going to talk about that. Doors. A little bit of a rant, I guess. So this started off as a conversation in Glass Half Dead has a Discord. I've got a Discord as well, but his is bigger, so I hang out there a lot as well. In the terrain section, and people were talking about how the Warhammer World Teams event. So the last Warhammer World event I went to, doors were not in use on the Octarius board. And I'd known about this slight controversy because I also watched Can You Roll a Crit, and he had somebody who had actually phoned up the events team and asked them, are the doors going to be turned on, in inverted commas, on the Octarius terrain? And they'd said, no, we're not using the doors. Okay, fine. That's their tournament, it's their rules. So I've been aware of that, but I consider somebody that not everyone that goes to a tournament also lives and breathes and eats Kill Team and consumes all the big Kill Team YouTube channels. So I don't consider that it was widely known. So they were talking about this. And so when I went to the event, I said after the first, I went, afterwards we went to the pub next to the travel lodge. And so there was my team, there was me and Zimbad and Mrs. T.I. and there was another team, Zeno Friends, who I think came third overall in the event, who's their team captain was, he's on my Discord as the Mighty Ibex, he's a good friend of mine, and his two close friends of his. And we were kind of chatting, and one of his friends who was reasonably new to Kill Team, and they were just like, oh yeah, well we use the doors in all our games. Like, everybody except me who'd happened to have seen this Can You Roll a Crit video where he'd said, oh, GW aren't using doors, had assumed they were using doors. And Zimba actually said, in one of my games, the judge came over and helped me and my opponent pointed out where all the doors were. Because the doors can be hard to see. This is my Octarius terrain, and because I also assumed, this was painted long before that Warhammer World event, you can see that I've gone out of my way to point all the doors are painted blue. Nothing else on these is painted blue, because I naturally assumed, once we got rules for doors, that they were going to retroactively affect the doors and hatches already present on the Octarius terrain. So when I pointed out on the Discord, lots of people use the rules for doors, people got really cross. And I wasn't even saying people should use the rules for doors. I am here for the argument that doors can be a little bit unbalanced because you've got, there's two things. There's the pop-out attack where you can pop through the door, shoot, and then dash back through the door and then not be shot back. Although in total fairness, you can do that around the corner of a building anyway. The bigger kind of abuse with doors, I guess, is that if we're inside a door and you're in base-to-base contact with the door, there's no mechanism for the opponent to charge you because you're kind of holding the door shut in their face. Some people, it turns out, really don't like the rules for doors and want to kind of keep them contained into the Chalnath set and then never have to interact with them by virtue of never building their Chalnath terrain. I don't think... People view the sheets that we've just gone through for the new set, people kind of view them as immutable, holy writ, as if they were the same level of, not mere suggestions, as if they're the same level of kind of data sheet like you would have for an operative. And I have real trouble seeing that way for a couple of reasons. First of all, because I know that a lot of people play on non-standard terrain, so you've got the entire American scene playing on MDF terrain. Now that is a whole separate rant that would surely rustle some feathers about why behind every big independent tournament organizer there seems to be a laser-cut terrain company, but I probably lost a subscriber just by mentioning that. But the point is, that's a whole thing. So they over there use independent terrain a lot. And what about the people that just want to use a couple of books and a Coke can and a foam hit? I mean, those people must exist still. I remember the 90s. But it's not just being old, it's I know that there's kids that I teach to play Kill Team at my school's wargaming club, and they do not go out and buy a big Kill Team box worth 100 and odd quid. They go in and they will buy a box off the shelf in the Games Workshop of usually Space Marines, but you know, maybe it'll be a box of Chaos Space Marines or a box of Eldar, and they put it together and they borrow my rule books and they play with whatever bits of terrain that they have in the box and they get on with the game. And so I'm very much in, because I see a lot of kids playing, I'm very much in the mode of go, well, that's obviously a door, so that's going to be a door. That's a ladder, so that's going to have scalable. If something is, you know, the height of Octarius and Vertigus off the board and is flat, it's going to be a vantage point. And if something is the height of the Sector Mechanicus or the Sanctum Imperialis terrain, that's the couple of inches taller, then I was going to call that a punishing vantage point. And now we've got rules for steps, and I'm perfectly capable as an adult of going, okay, well, here are some steps. Obviously, they're going to have the steps rule. To me, that makes intuitive sense. And all I said in this conversation on Discord is like, I totally understand if tournament organisers feel that for balance they want to turn off the doors, but I feel like they should write on the terrain sheet, the doors on this set are not, the door rule does not apply to the doors modelled onto the terrain, or words to that effect. That was my only point. My only point was trying to alert people who care far more about balance than me that game as played, right? We hear a lot of rules as written versus rules as intended, and that isn't even the argument we're having here. The argument is something else called game as played, which they talked about in a White Dwarf editorial around the turn of one 40k edition to another, where the designers actually went around Games Workshops and talked to people playing the game, and they took the misconceptions from the rules that everybody was just playing with, and they went, okay, well, let's make that the rule. Game as played is really important, and alerting people to the fact that everybody's playing this way, and it might be right, it might be wrong, but the fact is still that many people are assuming that if the door is on a model, it should have the door rule. I know for a fact there were people at the first Kill Team tournament before Chalnath was even out that were playing that you could move through the doors because it's intuitive. But this is not, it is not an argument that you should always play doors with your Octarius terrain. I am totally here for the fine balance argument that says, oh, you know, doors are broken and they promote some negative experiences and you have to be really careful how you place terrain. Like, no, I'm here for all of that conversation. I just think that you shouldn't jump all the way down somebody's throat because they assume the door works like a door. I think that's a reasonable thing to think. And I think if the community wants to be more open and accepting, then it's not unreasonable that if you're doing the really cool little placemat terrain layout for a tournament, you say, yeah, there's doors modelled on, they're not using the door rules. Does that hurt anyone? Is anything of value lost by you having to state that? Or it just seems like I had one person say to me, I just state standard Octarius rules apply, and no matter how many times I state that, people insist on trying to use the doors. I mean, maybe if you were trying to be a little bit less, like, from my point of view, needlessly oblique by saying standard Octarius, not everyone has purchased Octarius, my friend. Okay, not everyone who plays Kill Team has ever purchased one of the big Kill Team boxes. Right? They've bought a box of models that they like, they've lovingly built and painted them, they've worked out what the rules are for their team from Wikipedia, and they want to go and play, and they've not really thought about what we've talked about in this video, which is the little datasheet type things for the rules for terrain. They've probably never looked at the datasheet type things for rules of terrain. Like, I know, and we're not even talking about kids. I know that I have friends, not in my gaming group, which is really small, because basically just me and Zim and my wife, and we're quite, obviously running a YouTube channel, we're quite literate in the rules, but I have friends that play up north who literally they give Kill Team a go, they'll play it, they're just pulling army bits out of their 40k army and playing a game, and they do not know which supplement the rule for the door is in, and therefore logically which bit of terrain the rule for the door is going to apply to. And they're probably not playing on the official terrain, they're probably playing on whatever bits of 40k terrain, whatever gaming cafe they happen to be in, happen to have on the shelf. And so being able to say, that's a door, that's scalable, that's this and that's that, let's go, is really valuable. Let's not weirdly segregate and say, no, the only terrain that's allowed to have functioning doors is the what's it called? The Chalnath terrain, not Sanctum Imperialis, Sector whatever, the high gothic ruiny stuff that came in Chalnath, to somehow say that's the only terrain that's allowed to have a door seems really strange to me. And look, if that's the way you want to run your tournament, the tournament organizer is God. I am not in any way daring to tell people how they should define their terrain. I am just saying it is not unreasonable for humans to assume, Discord noise, I'm so unprofessional. It's not unreasonable for humans to assume that if there's a door modelled on top of each terrain and there's a rule for a door, then people will sometimes think that they can use the rule for a door to describe the thing that's obviously a door. I mean, look, we live in a world where for balance, people often turn off the vantage point rule on two of their Octarius buildings because it's generally accepted that that's okay for a thing to do. And I have no problem with this. I have no problem with people defining the terrain as they like. The only thing I'm trying to say is, please, don't come in with this set of assumptions where everybody's on the exact same wavelength as you vis-a-vis which particular rules have been errated into the core book and which particular rules are in which particular supplements. Because not everyone is that high engagement. And if you insist on this sort of stuff and you don't go out of your way to write things like, oh, we're not using the door rules for the doors, even though to you that might be a totally redundant sentence, you are going to stop new people coming into the game. All right? Be flexible. And if it's very important to you, state outright. Here ends the rant. I'm probably going to get downvotes, angry comments, and people unsubscribing, but it was a conversation I had a couple of days ago, and it's really bothered me. So that's it. Excised. I'm no longer carrying it in my soul. It is out there on the web. I no longer have to think about the people who are upset that doors are sometimes used as doors. Good. Cleansing. If you enjoyed that, even if you disagreed with me, if you thought that was amusing or anything, please do subscribe and give me a like to counteract the people that I've just made angry beyond belief, because I'm sure it's happened. Right, good. So, where do you stand on the door debacle? Please comment. Please tell me that I'm, even if it's to tell me that I'm a fat fool who's wrong about everything, actually, back and forth debate is good. If you agree with me, even better. Okay. A little bit about painting terrain. As you know, if you've been watching the bits of battle reports that I do and the random shots, I basically play every game on the Octarius set. That isn't really because I'm one of these people that goes, Octarius is the only way to play Kill Team. There are those people who firmly believe Kill Team only makes sense on the Octarius board. The reason I'm not painting terrain is entirely because I'm trying to fill in the White Dwarf Hobby Bingo card, and there is only one square for 40k terrain, and I have painted my 40k terrain for this year. It was Octarius. And so if I paint another set of 40k terrain, that's time that could have been spent painting something that was going to tick something else off on the Hobby Bingo card, like Warhammer Fantasy terrain. Right, even though I will get far less use out of it, I've set myself a target and I want to stick to it. But I don't want anybody thinking it's because I don't like the terrain and I'm one of these people that thinks Octarius is the purest expression of Kill Team. I actually really like the look of the Moroch terrain. It actually looks like it might be much quicker to paint than the other stuff as well, because you can basically just pick a colour, do a couple of dry brushes and it's done. So maybe I will paint it even if I can't tick off a bingo card square. But it's not one of those things that I could paint on stream, because it's not like it. Like, nobody wants to watch you dry brushing a giant brick of terrain. Speaking of streams, there's a hobby stream, 7 PM on Tuesday. Usually they're 7 till 10. I'm off work this week because it's the half-term holiday, so it's going to be 7 PM till late, in inverted commas. And if you are on the fence about buying Moroch and somehow listening to me rant for 10 minutes about doors and an argument that I had with some anonymous guy on the internet has persuaded you that you want to buy Kill Team Moroch, I'd be indebted to you if you were to use the Element Games link down in the description if you're based in the UK, because I'll get about a £5 and you won't have had to give me the £5 yourself. It will have come from Element Games. So that's good. That's a way of supporting the channel and paying for all the things I had to buy to make the streaming work, which helps me out. All right, good. Thank you. Cheerio. Hopefully I haven't upset anyone too much. But if I have, please, we'll try and have amicable, restorative comments, and then we can get back on track. All right. Hope you have a wonderful time, whatever it is you're doing this Sunday, and cheerio, folks.